Let me introduce you to Michael, the deployment bunny Nyström. Michael, I found all kinds of pictures out there. I didn't know which ones to throw on the screen, so I grabbed a couple random here. I like your Jeep. I've seen some pictures of it parked in some nice places, so I envy you for that. Looks like a fun thing, and probably this time of year especially. So welcome, and thank you for taking your time today. We really appreciate you presenting from across the pond, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, an announcement. I usually hang around on these user meetings forever. This time, I actually need to drop out immediately after the meeting. And the reason is depressing. We currently are running 2 major cybercrime incidents, and we have 2 major companies that are wiped from the earth. They don't exist. And we are right now trying to struggle to rebuild these organizations. You will most likely find the news about these organizations in the newspaper or on television. The number of incidents we have is approximately 4 to 8 every month. Almost 60% of our staff works just on incidents, and that's depressing. So the reason why I want to have this little chat, this session, is that I really enjoy working with customers. It's just working with customers in this distressed situation is everything but funny. It's just depressing. And now I need to find my PowerPoint presentation. Here it is. So I call the session Stop Spreading Your Admin Credentials. And that's pretty obvious. I mean, if I ask any admin, it goes like, no, I'm taking care of my admins credentials. I save my passwords. I'm really good at that. I maybe have them in a vault. I'm really good with that. I never tell anyone my passwords. No. I do believe you, but that's not the problem. When you are using your credentials, you are, per definition, spreading them around. And that's the problem. It's not about social engineering that when somebody walks up and say, hey, can I have your credit? Or, can I have your credentials? It's about every time you do something, it will be exposed. And you can't really do anything about that. So you need to figure out the way how to minimize the risk of somebody stealing your credentials while you're using them. Why? Well, because 80% of all the attacks is based on the fact that they stole credentials. Forget about user stuff. It's never going to be user. I mean, it's so funny because we're working with 2 incidents right now, but I think I remember a couple of months ago or weeks ago, the company said, well, we took all the precautions we could. We taught the users, we instructed the users, and damn it, we forced the user to change the password every month. Yeah, the users don't really have any permissions, or at least they shouldn't have. So the users did need to change the credentials every month. The administrators, however, didn't change the domain admin password for more than 700 days. It's not the user accounts I'm scary about. It's you. It's your accounts. It's your admin accounts. Those are the accounts that people really want to steal. They don't really care about user accounts. So they will eventually get access to your environment. That can't be prevented. You need to assume more or less breached. You need to be, I wouldn't say paranoid, but you need to be afraid of using your credentials. Your reaction when a dialog box pops up and go like, fill out your credentials, you should automatically take at least 2 steps back and go like, whoa, why would I do that? I'm already logged on. Why do I need to provide credentials again? There's something fishy going on. Well, the problem is that most admins, including myself, goes like, oh, darn, I need to fill out my credentials again. Who was asking? Well, I need to log on to this server. Why? Well, I need to, I'm doing this and I need to fix this and I need to type in my credentials. You usually don't need to do that depending on how you manage your servers. The two most common ways to steal things is, of course, pass the hash and pass the ticket. Pass the hash can be prevented. Pass the ticket is kind of tricky, can't really be prevented unless you don't log on anytime ever. Then it's kind of easy to prevent it. When it comes to things like virtual machines, I mean, I'm assuming that most of you are running virtual servers. How many of them are BitLocker encrypted? Well, sure, it's not needed. It's in the data center. So who have access to the data center? It's for only authorized staff and a few others. Yeah. Is it possible to see that your virtual machine was copied to a USB stick? No, you can't see that. And we've seen that. Stolen domain controllers. And then the attackers can quietly, having a drink, crack 600 passwords, and then they log on to the environment, and then you're toasted. You need to be afraid at all times. That's the challenge. You should never automatically respond by typing in any kind of credentials. You should use things like MFA, and maybe you shouldn't even use passwords. You can use your credentials interactively only on devices you trust, and you can't trust anything. That's the basic. Now, in this call, I'm pretty sure Brian and Greg is on the call, right?
Yep, we're here.
Yep. Okay, so Brian, let me ask you, if your configuration manager has access to my workstation, would it be, in theory, possible for Brian to steal all my credentials if he wish so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you need to put much effort into doing so?
I'm system. I could do anything.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's one of the things, right? So you should use a machine that you can trust and nobody else have access to. My workstation that I'm using for each of the clients is isolated. I can't trust anyone to manage that device. Well, what happens with applications? Well, I can install my applications. Well, wouldn't it be better to have a deployment solution to automatically install all the applications? Yes, on my regular workstation, I have no issues whatsoever, but not on my administrative workstations. That one can't be touched by nobody. And if you really, really read through document that Microsoft says, they go like, this is how you build your own access, your admin workstation. You buy a computer in a random store, then you buy a DVD, then you go home and then you manually install that. That's the only way to really trust something, because the only person that has been involved in the deployment process of that machine was you and nobody else. Can you join it to domain? Yeah, but you do need to remove the domain admins from being able to access your machine. Otherwise, it again, you're exposing your credentials. And how often do you think we see this? Everybody that logs on and manage a Active Directory is using a privileged access workstation for Active Directory, no agents, and managed and deployed by the Active Directory team on their own. do you think that is very common? Yeah, and Brian says pause. Yes, privileged access workstation. Do you think we see this often? No, we don't. We do have customers that want to do this. But if I work with, let's say, just for the sake of argument, I have 1,000 customers, it's going to be 3 of them that realize that security might be pushed in a better direction. It doesn't mean it needs to be complicated. It just means it needs to be different. It's still a PC. It's still Windows 10. I mean, you still log on to it. It just, nobody else can log on to it. Can you see an autopilot device? No, you can't. It's not from a clean media. Can you use an MDT solution? In theory, if you control it, otherwise you can't. Can you use a dedicated config manager environment for doing this? You can absolutely do that. But that environment can only be used for these privileged access workstation and nothing else. And it needs to be isolated. And whomever is going to be manager on that machine, in this case, Greg is going to be the admin. Well, he also needs access that we all have, meaning he's going to be a level or a tier 0 administrator. He have access to everything. He also manage our workstation. Well, in that case, it's going to work. You need to avoid transporting your credentials. That's kind of tricky, but the most important thing is not the transportation itself, because if you transport your credentials over the network and they are secure, then it's fine. The problem is that you can't leave them on the other side. And the question is, when do you do that? In what kind of applications and situation would you store the credentials in the other end? And why would you do so? I'm pretty convinced that most of you have heard about Windows double hop. The double hop. The double hop issue. The double hop issue is something that Microsoft was forced to address a long time ago. Exactly. So Stephen is asking a really good question. How do you trust those admins to keep their own machines safe and updated? Okay. So you're an administrator of a bank. You manage and you can control every piece of data. You're hired to do so. If you can't patch your own machine, maybe you should apply for another job, like a janitor. They don't need to have responsibility. So that's the trick. It's all about you taking the role of protecting yourself. It's not about somebody else is protecting you. You are the one with the keys to the kingdom. You should know how to patch your own machine. Otherwise, you shouldn't have that job. Is it easy to force that to happen? No, it's not. But it kind of makes sense. If you can control anything, but you can't patch your own machine, maybe you should have another job. Simple as that. Because you can never control this anyway. So the double hop problem is a Kerberos thing. In Windows, before Kerberos, they fixed this by allowing anonymous log on to every device. So for instance, you could do a net use in NT4 to a domain controller without specifying name and password, and then you were anonymous access. So without specifying name and password, you can dump the entire database. Interesting thing. What's called null sessions. Really ugly. So they fixed that with Kerberos, but now they have another problem. And the problem is that you can't bring your interactive logon to another computer. They are scaled off, or they are scrubbed off when you go to the next machine. So for instance, if I need to do a remote desktop connection, the only way a remote desktop connection can work by default is to store the credentials in the other end. That's why you get the dialog box that's saying enter your name and credentials, because we can't read it. So it needs to be typed in. Eddie has a good question. Could NAC technology help out? It could help out, but it still doesn't really prevent people from stealing credentials. It's still going to be transported and you're still going to log on. So it's still going to be somewhere else. And that's going to be a problem. There are ways to do that. You can use Active Directory configuration silos, and that would help up. Yeah, correct. It's not going to update workstations, that's true. But it could prevent people from accessing those machines. So to work around Kerberos and the issues, Microsoft invented something called CRED SSP, and that's awesome. So the question is, what is CRED SSP? Let's type that instead. CRED SSP. Credential support provider. I can't even type. Yeah. Okay, configuring CRED SSP for use with WinRM and PowerShell. Okay, that seems like a good article. I haven't read it before, but it's deprecated and it says blah blah blah. And then here's how you configure it. You specify that you need to enable that on the server, and you specify that you need to enable that on the client, and you delegate the computer. It means that you need to configure CRED SSP to work by saying this machine is allowed to store credentials on my behalf. But when you use remote desktop, you don't need to configure that. And if you ever listen to Sami Laho, he's a Finnish guy, he's an MVP, he usually tells the story about RDP. RDP was invented by Microsoft for running remote desktop application. But in Windows 2000, they added RDP, and per definition, it was a way to access a server if all the other options were unavailable. It was a last resort. You should be able to use RDP to a machine if you can't configuring or access it in any other way. Don't use it on a daily basis. That was what they said. Today, I would say that 99% of everyone is constantly logging on to a machine using RDP. And RDP is using CRED SSP by default, and they store the credentials. Can you remove the stored credentials? Yes, you can, by changing your password. So if you want to do RDP, you can, as long as you, hold on. I'm going to answer the question on how to remotely control config manager. So you can by changing the password every time you log off, but nobody wants to do that. I mean, I hate that. So the question is, how do you remote? Well, you use the remote tools that has been around forever. So using the configuration manager console, that's fine. You log on interactively to one machine, and then you open a console, and then you remote. Now you need to create a folder. Okay, so then you use whack server $, and you create the folder, or you use remote PowerShell. When you do that, you never expose your credentials because they are exposed in only one location, on the machine that you interactively logged on to. Everything else is going to be just tickets, and they are not valid for many minutes anyway. There are ways to use remote desktop in a secure way, but let's get back to that. So it's about using the right tools and the right methods and be sure. So Eddie is asking about WinRM. Well, WinRM is fine. And this is the funny thing. Most people turn off remote management and they enable remote desktop. They should do the exact opposite around. And the thing is that the default settings on a Windows server is that remote desktop is turned off and remote PowerShell is enabled. And I can go to almost any customer and I will see that configuration flipped. It's like, why did you do this? Well, remote PowerShell is dangerous. No. Remote PowerShell is great compared to remote desktop, which more or less, excuse my bad language, it sucks. It's just a bad thing for management. It's a good way to be able to access a machine if you don't have any other options. But yeah, so the RD gateway is great, but that only protects your credentials over the network. It still stores the credentials in the other end. So a remote desktop gateway, as long as you don't use your admin credentials and you go to a jump station or your workstation, and from that machine, you elevate yourself in a session, and that will be okay. It's the interactive logon that is dangerous. But now you do need to interactively log on that jump station. And the question would be, can you trust that nobody else is on that machine? Well, it's a remote desktop server that we all connect to. Okay. And the question would be, are you all a member of the same club? Coming back to that. So privileged access is just not being an admin. It's kind of everything. I mean, one of the worst things we can see is people using Office 365, and they have they use AZSMUG, and they sync all the user accounts that they have, including your admin accounts. And then they connect those admins accounts that you have locally to be global admins in your Office 365 subscription. Oh my God. What you just did was create the ability to hack your on-prem environment to be a global admin. Global admins are never related to anything on-prem. And on-prem administrators have nothing with the cloud to do. The only thing you should sync between Office 365 and your own environment is the users with no permissions. So, person number X, Greg. Greg has an admin account in the domain. He has a user account in the domain. And if he needs to be an admin in Office 365, then he has another account for that. And the two admin accounts he has is not synchronized and not connected, and they are on totally different systems, and they will never be synchronized. But the default settings when you run the Azure AD Sync is to select all OUs and all users. And most people follow the guidelines that Microsoft have, and that's next, finish. And when they do, they synchronize everything, and they shouldn't do that. You need to make sure that the entire chain is okay. Active Directory needs to be okay. Somebody needs to be sure that your groups are okay. People needs to be okay. Password needs to be okay. Workstations needs to be, and the UI you're using to connect and manage your devices. I mean, a few of you have, I'm pretty sure that a few of you have been managing routers and switches, and you can either use a telnet connection using PuTTY to configure the switch, but you can also use an old ActiveX, or even better, no, it's an old Flash application to manage the environment. And the admin logs on to an application running Flash or Java. And no, what you should do is take that switch and find the biggest hole you have, and then you dump the switch in that hole, or you use command line tools to manage it, because they are pretty safe at least. You all belong to a club. You're all admins. And for those of you that did fly a lot, you know that you can enter an airline club, and you need to show your member card. And in that airline club, everybody is a member of that club. You know that. And when you are in the exclusive club, you have less people in the club, and you know that all these guys are a member of the same club. That's what you need to be sure. On the machines that you're logging on to, you need to assure that all the people that have the ability to log on to that machine is a member of the same level of club. That's called tiering. So you need to tier. Tier 0 is domain admins. Tier 1 is servers, and Tier 2 is Workstation. If Brian needs access to domain controllers, the config manager server, and Workstation, he needs to have 4 accounts. One for Tier 0, one for Tier 1, and one for Tier 2. And he can only use the Tier 2 account on a Workstation. He can only use the Tier 1 account on the server. And he can only use the Tier 0 account on a domain controller. Because this is how attackers do. They move around and trying to find a better password in a machine. And they can easily be in an environment for like 6 months, poking around without you knowing it. And then they find something and they go like, oh, great, let's launch an attack. And by the way, do you know how they do that? They check the ability for the company. They check the finance. They have finance expertise. So they do a math calculation on how much money could that company possibly be paying out in ransomware. So they do the math, and then they put themselves around 70% below the capability of the company to pay, and then they launch the attack and wait for the money. It's yeah, using a blue forest and red forest is smart. You don't need to do that. You don't need to. The recommendation from Microsoft to use a red forest is most likely going away because you can do that within the existing forest to avoid configuration issues. So having a privileged access workstation really makes sense. It's usually a physical machine that is locked down, BitLocker encrypted. It's a member of a domain protected by a host guardian services. So nobody can tamper with it. And on top of that, you run a virtual machine for each tier you have access to. So yes, Greg, you're going to have a laptop, and on that, you're going to have 4 VMs, 1 VM for each tier that you need to access. And if you suspect one of the VMs to be tampered, you just throw it away and you build a new one. And yes, you're going to need to build that physical machine as well. So that's how you do that. I'm not going to do a demo. I don't want to waste your time with that. But what you should do is that you should look on this. And if you haven't implemented this, the thing you start with, and I can see that Jeff has a question, the thing that you start with is protecting Tier 0, meaning your domain controllers, more or less. Yes, Jeff, please. What's on your mind?
Actually, you answered it. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. Another way to do this is, I heard a conversation before. Yeah, so how many customers actually implement and stick with this? Well, the ones that implement this, they stick with it. And every ransomware attack that we had so far, they all implemented this without discussions, without any hesitation. We just said, this is the way to secure the environment. And then they go like, okay, how much money do you want? That's pretty much like kids, you know, don't put the hand on the stove because you will burn your fingers. And then they do that anyhow, but they only do it once. If they are average, if they are, they might do it more times. I know. The problem is that when disaster happens, it's the few times when I can see a president of a company curling up in a corner of a conference room, crying and saying, why me? Why me? Why me? Why me? Like, yeah, because you're an idiot. I can't really say that. They usually figure out that on their own. So one thing to also do is to divide a fabric and the rest, meaning that all the SANs you have, they should never be exposed to anyone. It should be exposed to virtual machines. And you should have access to the virtual machine, but you should never see any physical hardware. You should never access anything physical besides your laptop. Everything should be virtualized. Absolutely everything. Yeah, but it's faster to run everything directly from the SAN. Yes, but then you can access the SAN from your tenant environment. Yeah, it's usually about money. And the first time they hit ransomware, they realize how much money that's going to cost. Well, they don't do that immediately. They do that when we send them the bill. They usually pay without any questions. You can use remote PowerShell, that's fine. You can use Windows Admin Center, that's fine. You can use remote server tools. You can use WinRM, WinRS. You can use Server Manager. You can use all the consoles from the different tools. Yeah, that works too. What you can't use is RDP. And as long as you trust your own machine, you're good. And let me show you how to actually do RDP in a fairly secure way. So here's Windows Admin Center. I'm going to show you that later. But OK, so go away. So in this case, I'm just running my remote desktop connection, and we're going to connect to DC01. And you see, I'm adding a command called restricted admin. Let's do it on 2. I'm adding the command of restricted admin, and look on the beautiful thing that happens here. It didn't ask for a password. It just logged me on, right? You don't need to type anything. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Well, I think it is. Question is, does this work on all servers? Let's do that on DC01. No, it doesn't. By default, it doesn't work. You need to enable this, which is kind of weird. The restricted admin feature has been possible to use since Windows 2008, R2, and Windows 7. So it's really a brand new feature that nobody knows about, but it needs to be configured. So it's not really complicated, but let's take the restricted admin as a word, pump up this, go here, because there's another setting as well, restricted admin versus remote guard. It needs to be enabled. Here's the 2 options you have. Well, here's the 3 options. This is the bad ones. This is the one that you always use when you just fire up RDP to connect. It doesn't give you single sign-on. It gives you access to Kerberos NTLM, and you can access services from the server, which is kind of nice, but it doesn't prevent anything else. So this is nice from a feature standpoint. It's like driving a car without brakes, light, and it's a bit rusty. And then you have 2 other things to choose from. Restricted admin mode has been available for a long time. You need to flip a registry key to use it on the machine that you're connected to. The other one is Windows Defender Remote Credential Guard. That only works in Windows Server 2016 and above. The good thing with Windows Defender Remote Credential Guard is that it works even if you're a user. Restricted admin mode only works if you're a local admin. So you can use restricted admin mode on all the different systems if you really need to log on to that device. You don't have access to services from the server. That's going to be prevented because it doesn't allow you to pass through that kind of credentials. But you can do most of the things that you can't do locally that you can do remotely anyway. If you really need to log on and you really need to have no limitations whatsoever, then you log on using the local administrator account. If anyone gain access to that machine, they already are administrators. If you give them the same administrator account they already have, it doesn't really hurt. You should use this and you should configure this. It doesn't mean you're going to indeed configure it on all the machines, but you should at least start configuring your servers for the ability to do so and start using the command line to connect. It's kind of sad. Anyone using restricted admin mode today or remote credential guard when you're connecting to servers for managing? Anybody thinking of using it in the future?
All quiet. There's some yeses coming in.
Yeah. So another way to work remotely is to use the Windows Admin Center. If you haven't tried that, just download it and use it. It's also safe because all the credentials are saved and stored within the session. As long as you close the sessions, when you're done, everything is gone. Nothing is stored anywhere. And you also have the ability to use manage as, which means that you can have this console and go like, well, this server is managed by that user account and that server is managed by that user account. And that's kind of easy. You just define and say manage as and you specify whatever name and password you want to have. It is possible to use single sign-on, but then you need to set up Kerberos constrained delegation. Not advanced, but you need to do that. Therefore, you need access to Active Directory to do so. You shouldn't need to do so. But sometimes you're going to have things when you want to manage a cluster. Windows Admin Center is going to go like, well, we need to enable CredSSP. And then you should go like, oh, Michael said something about CredSSP. Do I really need to do so? Yeah, there are things you can't remotely manage without enabling CredSSP, but Windows Admin Center will disable that immediately after you log off. So it's kind of safe anyway. So using these kind of tools and the RSAT tools, yeah, that's okay. Then you minimize the amount of locations where you actually store your credentials. Doing the tiering thing, which we've done for a lot of customers, not thousands, but we've done it for a lot of customers. I'm working currently with 4 of them. It takes a while because it's about organization. I'm going to take Greg and Brian as an example. Working for the same company, doing the same thing. Now Brian needs to be a tier 0 admin and Greg is going to be a tier 1 admin. Okay, so they can't log on to the same service anymore. How would they share scripts with each other? Well, they can have a shared area to share information, but it's going to be things like that. Do I recommend a standalone server for Windows Admin Center? I do recommend a standalone server for Windows Admin Center. Not needed, but I do recommend it because it's a web server and it consumes a lot of resources to be fast. You also want to have fast hard drives. But technically, it's just a web server that runs a bunch of PowerShell script and nothing else than that. I need to go back to my PowerPoint slide. Here it is. Did I do that? So do you need to do anything? No, you don't. I mean, it's your environment, it's your life, it's you make the decision. But ransomware today, it's not a joke anymore. I mean, one of the companies we're working with is a global sales org. They just lost 500 stores. They don't have an income. It's going to take them a while to get back. And therefore, you also need to have some kind of disaster plan. And I will show you what we use as a disaster plan, because, I mean, it's easy to say, well, you can always restore from the backup. You don't really have any backups, most likely. And even if you have, they might be encrypted. And building a new configuration environment and config manager environment, you can build a lab, right? But building a new configuration manager environment for 10,000 devices, you don't really do that in a day unless you have a really awesome script. Is it normal that when you use RDP with Windows Admin Center that it asks for your credentials? Yes, it is. And you shouldn't use RDP. That's the problem, because it's using CredSSP and it's going to ask you for credentials. Otherwise, it can't connect. It's one of the feedbacks we have for the Windows Admin Center that they should include the restricted admin or remote guard, but they don't. So if you want to use remote desktop, then you use it from the console, and you should use remote guard or remote credentials guard. So what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to restore machines. And this is a solution that we've been working on for a while. Mostly Johan Arvidmark, me, and Andreas Hammarskjöld from 2 Pint Software. So you might have heard of it, but Mikael Nyström was building MDT a couple of years ago. And one of the last things he did was say, well, you can shift everything into PowerShell. So he did kind of a proof of concept. We've been working with that for about 2 years. So, and now it's working. It's free, you can download it. We extended this with the software from 2 Pint Software, which in this case also is free. Yeah, multi-factor authentication is not foolproof either. I agree. It's always the really, and you should only have access to whatever you really need to have access to. Nothing is foolproof, and that's why it's always about protecting your credentials. We use multi-factor for everything, but we also have a SOC that monitors all the activities. And whenever I do something weird, I get a phone call within a few minutes, go like, hey, are you working with a United States customer in the Minneapolis area? Yeah, okay. We're just checking because you did an impossible jump. Hey, your logon seems to come from a proxy server. Are you using a proxy server? No, I'm not. Okay, we're going to reset your account, and here's the way to re-access all the things you want to do. And that happens twice a year approximately. So as you can see that in this case, the deployment share is actually a URL. In this case, it's just HTTP because it's a demo and a developer environment to make it faster. But I pick a sequence, and that's my deployment share, and we are deploying across the internet. In this case, it's local, but it's going to work the same way. And the reason why we extended it with 2 Pint Software is because the download of all the files is done by the bits ACP, which is basically using branch cache. So in this case, it's enabling the BCD on port 1337. And all the downloads that comes in this solution is done by the bits ACP. So instead of doing an HTTP bits download or anything like that, it's going to download everything using branch cache peer-to-peer, and that speeds things up. Yep, port number is 1337. You can have any port number. It's just local in between the all different machines. The default port is 80, which usually is a bad one, but you can use any port. So the download speed, since I have one client on the same network, is about 300 megs per second. If you have a few clients, you usually bump it up to something around 600 or 700, as long as your CPUs are done. So downloading the entire WIM file is, I don't know, a minute. It takes more time to apply the WIM file than to download it. One of the reasons I'm working with this right now is because directly after this meeting, we are going to redeploy 500 clients in 49 different locations. And we're going to use that across the internet because this customer have nothing, and they really would like to have store opening again very soon. Any questions, any comments? Feel free to either chat or to type. It doesn't really matter. Anybody wants to go home and pull the plug? Change the career into be a gardening guy, driving a tractor. Well, you can die of that too. Yeah, most of you are already home. Yeah, the thing is that since cyber crimes used to be a spin-off for criminal organizations, but it's shifting into be the primary way. They can't sell drugs. They can't sell illegal guns. They can't do that. They can't do the business they always been doing because there's a pandemic. People are home. They need to find another way to make money. Working is not what they're going to do. So attacking organization is easy, especially when everybody's working from home. It's just depressing. Can we die now?
We need a light note to finish this on. Come on.
Yeah. I know it's depressing. And that wasn't my intention, but my intention was more of the it's really going bad.
Hey, Michael, this is Jeff.
Yeah.
Is this so the Windows Admin Center, right? And forgive me, everybody on the line, if I'm misspeaking here, or I should know this, but is that basically Honolulu, and now the code names and everything are all done, and we have Windows Admin Center now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Windows Admin Center is the old Project Honolulu. It can't do everything. It can do approximately 80% of every remote server management administration you need to do. Stop and start. You can check drivers. You can upload drivers. You can do most of the computer management. You can do some Active Directory, DNS, DSP. Everything is done using PowerShell, and it's actually secure because it fits into the just enough administration and just in time administration model. So you can configure. I could configure that device for Jeff. I can make Jeff not an admin, but he can perform administrative tasks with his account, but he can't do anything. I can tell him that you can use this command, and this command. The other commands doesn't work for you. Since it's PowerShell, you can use JIT and GIA to make it happen.
So since we set up Honolulu back when it was in its infancy, there's some upgrades that we would need to do to it now?
Yeah, just run the installer again. And by the way, you're going to need to run the installer again approximately once a month because that's the release schedule they have. And so here's the new version. If you go here, one of the cool things, they actually added graphic to it. So now you can see, I need to log on to that device. Show this. So now you can see small icons of things here, like, certificates. It has a picture of certificates, but you can do most of the stuff with the server. This is a domain controller, so I can poke around with DHCP, DNS, all the events. I can upload files for the firewall. I can't install software, but I can uninstall software. Modifying with groups, networks. And yes, you can disable your network adapter. Yeah, I tried that. Yes, you can't regain contact. Does it warn you? No, it doesn't. You can do remote PowerShell, deal with processes, registries, remote desktop. That one is not faster or better or anything like that. Yes, you can do most of it. I can do anything in storage, partitioning and format and create virtual hard disk, whatever I want to do with this disk. They also have an awesome, to be honest, performance monitor, which is this is the new performance monitor replacing the old performance monitor, where you can create your workspace and add your counters. You can measure more machines at the same time. In this case, I'm only measuring one machine, but for a cluster, you can see the entire cluster at the same time, things like that. Is it good or bad? Yeah, I think it's good. We can see memory, single instance, select counters. I don't know, committed bytes in use. You can see it as a heat map if you want to, or you can see it as a report, or you can see it as a line, or whatever you want to see. Min-max. Pretty awesome. You can save them, you can upload them. And it's safe. It's using port 443 to connect, and it's using remote PowerShell to connect to all the instances. And you never expose your credentials. It has a ton of plugins called extensions. You can build your own ones, but third-party companies are doing that for hardware. HP, Fujitsu, Lenovo, Dell is doing that. I have a bunch of extensions already installed. Azure Networking, Azure Security, and so on, and so on, and so on. Can it talk directly? Yes, it can. You can go to Windows Admin Center and you can connect to a workstation like this. And they also have a Config Manager agent plugin if you want to do that, which means you can see all the statistics from Config Manager, and you can poke around with most of the controls as well. And since I'm logging on to a workstation, I should use my tier 2 account. I can't do everything, but I can do a lot. For instance, there's like, a user has a problem with a certificate. Okay, yeah, we can find, show me all the expired certificates. Can we remove a certificate? Yes. Can we add a new one? Sure. Can we check what they are? Yeah, we can. Can we replace a driver? Yeah, sure. We can go to devices. We want to change the, I don't know, this display adapter. It's an NVIDIA. Here it is. Here's the device driver. We can go to driver, details, update driver. And if you're into PowerShell, you can check all the PowerShell scripts, because when you hit that little button, it gives you a list of all the functions that are being used, and you can do copy and paste, and then you have a huge library of computer management PowerShell functions. It's a couple of thousands made by Microsoft, and you're free to use them to whatever you want. So it's a good way to learn PowerShell as well. I'm over time. I should shut up, and I should give the floor back to Greg.
Thank you. I do see a couple of hands up. I don't know if you guys have anything. You can speak up. Otherwise, we'll put your hands down here in just a minute. Anyone have a closing remark here before we get ready for our next break? Well, thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. I hope you don't have to work too late of a night tonight.